Hey everyone, welcome to the Naked Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Sage Hobbs, author and creator of Naked Communication, and I'm so psyched you're here. This show is all about taking charge of your life in new and inspired ways to create a life you deeply love. It's about being more you in all areas of your life, more courageous, more free, more alive, more naked. I'll be sharing stories and advice from amazing people around the world who are up to incredible things on how they are successfully breaking free from fear and old patterns in order to create incredible relationships and impactful lives so that you can do the same. This is the place to be inspired to live a courageous and naked life. Let's do this. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Naked Conversations. I'm your host, Sage Hobbs, and I'm so grateful to be back with you. This is season 3, episode 2 of the podcast. If you want more information of anything we talk about today, you can find it over on the website. You can also download more episodes over there or on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you listen. I have an incredible guest on the show today. Sanam DeWan is a dear old friend of mine. Full disclosure, we met when we were 18 years old, freshmen at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. We were next door neighbors in the dorms together. And we have been friends now for over 20 years. And to watch her become the brilliant, passionate, generous leader that she has become has been such an honor. I'm so proud to call her a friend, and I know you're going to be blown away by her insight and courage and wisdom today. So let me say, where do I even begin with Sanam? There's the formal bio, which is super impressive. But before I dive into that, I just want to tell you a bit about what we discussed today. She's really what I would call a health activist. She's a doctor and she has a doctoral degree from Harvard in public health. And she lives in Tanzania, in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, with her 2 kids and her husband. And she's working for UNICEF. And she is really committed to reducing the number of women and children who die in childbirth. That has been her life's work. It's bigger than that. And we really discuss how she was an immigrant herself. She came to the United States when she was, I believe about 6 years old. And she was raised in a multicultural family. She speaks 5 languages. We talk about how that really impacted the way she sees the world and the kind of work that she has chosen to do in the world. And not just that, both being an immigrant herself and coming from a multicultural and diverse perspective. And we really talk about this idea of liberation and where it comes from, how we can contribute to it. We talk about what courage looks like, no matter how accomplished you are, the incessant need to quiet the voice in your head that says you're not good enough or you don't know enough. This is really a conversation with a woman who has committed her life to not fame and glory, but deep, deep impact in how health systems are designed, how people have access to medical care, and what that looks like in terms of equity and justice as well. She spent over a decade working in federally qualified health centers in the United States, working primarily in immigrant communities. And then she moved to Tanzania and has really spent a lot of her life and research looking at populations in East Africa. So you're going to totally dig this conversation with my dear friend Sanam. I'm going to tell you a little bit more formally that Dr. Sanam DeWan is a health specialist with the UNICEF Tanzania Country Office, a family physician, and a health systems researcher with expertise in maternal and child health and improving quality of care. She was the lead researcher and writer on improving quality for the Lancet Global Health Commission on high-quality health systems in the SDG era. And for those of you who aren't in the health space, SDG era means Sustainable Development Goals era. She's currently a collaborating researcher at Ifakara Health Institute in Dar es Salaam, and she completed her doctorate in medicine at the University of Pennsylvania, her doctorate in public health at Harvard, and her postgraduate training at the Lawrence Family Medicine. She is a mom of 2. She's hilarious. Little side note is that she was a black belt in karate when we were in college, and she performed that in children's theater. So she's a woman of a myriad talents. She speaks 5 languages, but more than anything, she's incredibly humble and modest and incredibly brilliant and impactful. And I really believe that's something I want all of my listeners to always hear inside of themselves. What is that yearning? What is that opportunity to use your own story and the ways that you have lived your life to make the impact that you desire to make, whatever that looks like for you. So without further ado, I introduce you to my dear friend, Sanam. Enjoy. And if you love the show, as always, please share it with your friends and leave a review wherever you listen. It makes a huge difference in this information getting shared and these stories being told. And I really believe in that collective conversation. It increases all of our courage to live the lives we were born to live and make the impact we were born to make. Here we go. Okay, I have with me today a dear, dear old friend of mine, Sanam DeWan, whom I am so excited to introduce all of you to. She is truly brilliant and fun and funny and kind and one of my favorite people in the world. So I'm really excited to talk to her for all of you to really learn about the work she's doing in the world and the courage it has taken to look for answers to questions that have been challenging for many, many, many years and what she's doing to uncover some of those answers. So, hi, Sanam. Thank you for being here.
Hi, Sage. Thank you for inviting me.
Yay. Okay, so I'm going to start with a question that I ask everyone who comes on the show, which is, what does courage mean to you?
Courage for me means turning off that little voice inside my head that says that nothing is good enough and that I need to be better and do better and work harder and all that before I put myself out there. So being courageous feels like turning that off, which I feel like I've learned to do over the years, and just trusting myself and all of the gifts and privileges I've had and putting myself out there and seeing what happens.
Awesome. And you and I have talked about that so much throughout our lives together. And it's a voice that I feel like can be really, really powerful, particularly in the minds of women who have big things to say. So I'm actually curious, what does it look like for you to turn that off a bit now? How have you gotten to a place for maybe women who are on a different part of the journey, who want to share their work or their ideas with the world, but have that voice of it's not good enough, I'm not ready? What does that look like to turn that off for you?
To be quite honest with you, it's like in the American context, a little bit embarrassing to talk about religion and faith. But I think for me, that's been a big part of kind of coming to maturity on that topic. So yes, I spent years and years sort of talking myself out of that or, training myself to quiet the voice and, that kind of slow process. But I think the real turnaround for me was when I just sort of realized that I was being just so ungrateful for what I've been given, that voice was the voice of me being ungrateful. And also, it's like strange. It's like this combination, I think, of being ungrateful and also kind of being arrogant. Like, why do I think that whatever I do in the world is so important or so big or has such a potential impact that it needs to be perfect? No, like I'm a drop in the bucket. I'm going to do what I do and move on. Yeah. And that's what we all do. We just try to do our best in whatever small way we can.
Well, I don't think you're doing small things at all. And we're going to hear more about that. However, I get what you're saying. I love that. It's an interesting way of looking at it because a lot of times people think arrogance are the people who are loudly saying everything that they're doing, and it's actually like arrogance can be holding you back from really sharing what you have to offer because you make it overly significant. And therefore, you don't do it unless it's just perfect, right? I love that perspective. I'm going to take that with me. I was curious because this is something I'm always working on. The people I work with are always working on. My clients who are all like really smart, brilliant, big-hearted people still have that voice, right? That sort of cycles through of, oh man, I don't know enough. I'm not ready. It's not time. It's not good enough yet. So I'm always curious when somebody says they've found some degree of mastery around that, how they do it. And I appreciate that there's a spiritual practice in your faith that has also helped cultivate that willingness to dive in. And I don't think it should be embarrassing to talk about. We'll probably talk about more in our conversation today. So tell us, for those who don't know you, tell us about your work and really what led you to do the work you're now doing. And I think it's just amazing work. So I know there's a huge question, so I will help you piece it together. But give us an overview of what is the work you're currently doing and the most recent steps that really got you here.
When are you going to share your bias? Like, you're my biggest fan. You always have been. So
I'm going to share it unabashedly throughout this entire conversation.
Biased.
I'm totally biased. And for those who don't know her, they're going to be on my side because it's actually, while I love you and you lived next door to me when we were 18 years old in the dorms and you were a total slob. How about that? I'll tell everybody.
Oh, I'm not a slob anymore,
Oh,
Sage.
okay. So maybe you're not a slob anymore.
Amazing things.
Amazing transformation is possible. Let's just say that.
KonMari is a genius.
So while, I know all of the human sides of you, which is what, I think is such an amazing thing about showcasing your brilliance, as well as I know all of the human sides of you, all of the things that are challenges and have been challenges as we've sort of grown up together over a couple of decades. And objectively speaking, you have worked really hard and put yourself into situations that have been very courageous in order to make a difference in the world. People are going to hear about it. So we're going for it. And you're just going to have to check your modesty and let me shine a light on your awesomeness. So tell people what you do.
Okay. I left undergrad and I knew I wanted, and I was already doing work in sub-Saharan Africa as a student. And I knew I wanted to do something that allowed me to learn about the lives of people and to help voice people's ideas and to use that process to improve health. And that sounds really vague, and it took me a while to figure out what are ways to actually do that as a profession, as a career. And so I worked for some NGOs for a while, and I found that incredibly frustrating for a variety of reasons, primarily that, you end up doing what the donor wants and not really doing what people necessarily say they need in their lives. And then I decided I wanted to go to medical school. So I did that. And then trained as a family physician, all the while sort of taking whatever opportunities I could to work abroad, to work in primary care abroad. I worked in a tent camp after the earthquake in Haiti. I worked as a solo physician in the middle of nowhere in Ghana. That was the most traumatizing experience of my life. But just really always connecting back to wanting to work in sub-Saharan Africa. Oh, I studied Swahili for years and was really interested sort of from a more anthropological perspective in the cultures of East Africa. So I'm half Iranian and half Swiss, and the East African coast is influenced by Iran and many other cultures. And so it's this really interesting melting pot and has always been really fascinating to me. So then I finished residency and was really committed to this idea of needing to get my clinical chops. I didn't want to be another physician with that MD after my name, but without really having spent time in the trenches. I could see this really cool thing that more seasoned clinicians had. They just had this instinct for taking care of people, and I really wanted to do that. I spent about a decade doing that before I kind of came back to my original love, which was around, populations and East Africa, and decided to basically stop being a clinician and went back to grad school and got my doctorate in public health. During that period of really amazing period of just stopping, of not being a service provider anymore, not being in service of people, but just being a learner. It's a really humbling and amazing opportunity to sort of stop and read and think. So during that process, I met my super amazing, wonderful mentor, Margaret Crook, and sort of put together that what made sense for me from sort of a public health and public action and research and clinical perspective was to focus on the quality of care that people receive in low and middle income countries. Specifically thinking about how to improve the quality of care that people receive. And that's been basically what I've been up to since then. That's several years ago now, 3-4 years ago that I sort of put that together, and have just been really happy that I've stumbled into this area of practice. It's been super interesting from sort of a research perspective, trying to understand what do people think is quality healthcare? And then from an action perspective, how do we actually mobilize entire systems and countries to improve what people receive and what people deserve.
Mm-hmm. I love that. What people receive and what they deserve. Okay, I'm going to interrupt you right there. I mean, I know you so well, and I just love listening to you talk about yourself because you're well, I decided to go to medical school, and, then I decided to spend 10 years practicing medicine. And you're just so, going back to your initial thought about, conversation we just had around arrogance, you're just so humble. I just love that about you because it's really quite an amazing thing to decide, hey, I'm curious about how I can really listen to people and what their needs are. What are people asking for? What is it that from their point of view, what suggestions do they have to solve their own challenges? That's always been something you've asked. And then you were like, I want to do it from a health perspective. And you really have positioned yourself as a health specialist beyond just being a practicing doctor. But what are the questions that need answering and who might be able to help me answer them? And that's the path I think that led you back into getting your doctoral degree at Harvard. It's in public health, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Public health.
It's like with an applied edge, right? Where you're really looking at how.
Yeah.
Yeah. Say a little bit about that.
It's a pretty great degree. I have to say it's a doctor of basically the practice of public health. So it's an advanced degree for people who aren't interested in research specifically. Like I've actually ended up doing a lot more research than most of my colleagues from my cohort. We study leadership and management. We take accounting courses. We learn the nuts and bolts of how to make change. How do you actually move organizations forward? We also learn research. We also learn theory and population health and all these kinds of things. So it's a real interdisciplinary degree that trains you to have all the skills you need to be a leader in public health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Got it. And that was really what made out sort of was the synergy point for you, right? Between the practicing of the medicine. I mean, I want to sort of think of you a little bit as almost a health advocate in a sense of you're looking at a systemic way of advocating for underrepresented populations' well-being. And before you were doing that in Sub-Saharan Africa, even when you were practicing for the 10 years before you went back to graduate school, you were practicing a lot in federally qualified health centers, right?
Yeah. I worked almost exclusively in community health centers. Yeah, I feel like I've just been collecting tools. So I don't often think of myself as an advocate, but I think that's right. I have this...
Or an activist, maybe even. Yeah.
Because there's this this driving thing really at the end that I care most about, which is like even the quality of care thing. That's kind of like an arena that I'm in, but it still all feels in service of an agenda, like my activist agenda, the thing I want to change.
Yeah,
which is to reduce the number of women and children that die in childbirth. There are other things that come along with it. Yes, the quality of people's lives and their experiences and all these things add up. But really, my dream impact would be to be able to say that I've had some hand in reducing the number of women and children that die preventable deaths, especially around childbirth. I feel like I've been collecting tools, and some people will do research because that is the thing that they love, or they study sociology because that discipline is what gets them excited. For me, all of those things that I've learned, or even medicine, all of that, they feel like tools in service of, this agenda, which is kind of, I guess, a form of activism.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. That's how I think of it. Right. You are driven by, I love how you said that. My dream impact would be to feel like you contributed to reducing the number of women and children who die in childbirth from preventable deaths.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
That would be amazing. That was sort of the core. When I was looking at season 3, I was really thinking like, I want to bring people on who are courageously curious. That could feel like such a daunting question, right? Since the beginning of time, since women have been having children, we've had deaths in childbirth. And yet now we have so many more resources and tools that should be able to curb that tide. It seems, I think, for a lot of people, like, where do you even begin with a question like that? That is the real reason I wanted you on the show, is to say, okay, look, there's this huge question. How am I going to chip away at it? What can I do that might bring some measure of shift to this problem? So for those who aren't in the health field, and I'm not sure how many of my listeners are, give us a bit of information around what are the rates of maternal mortality and child mortality and childbirth. What are you kind of up against?
I think that the biggest thing to note is that, the kinds of mortality rates that I'm talking about. So I live in Tanzania, where the maternal mortality rates, the US has not seen maternal mortality rates like this in over 100 years. And
wow. Okay.
The deaths that we're talking about are from things that we know how to prevent. For example, something that we train to take care of in the US is preeclampsia. So recognizing that, when a woman has hypertension and what to do about that. And, if you don't do anything about that, you end up with eclampsia. Eclampsia is something that you rarely see in the US. I mean, we almost take that for granted in our training that yes, we know how to take care of a clamptic seizure, but it's so rare. Here, the problem is eclampsia. Women are dying of the thing that we don't even see anymore, really, in the United States. So the rates in Tanzania of maternal deaths are in the 500s per 100,000. Those rates are incredibly high. It's difficult because it's still actually a rare occurrence. Those numbers can fluctuate quite a bit, but they're in the 500s. The real issue, I think, is that number
and that's maternal death.
Yes.
It's not children.
So that's maternal deaths that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Infant deaths are 50s per 1,000 right now.
Okay.
Yeah. And then about half of those are newborn deaths. The problem, especially here in Tanzania, is that those rates have sort of stalled. We saw big changes during the last, I would say, maybe 2 or 3 decades, real serious improvements in places like Tanzania. And then in the last decade, things have really stalled. And what we think is happening is that, or what me and my sort of research buddies think is happening, is that we've sort of taken care of the low-hanging fruit. We've taken care of, the deaths that can be prevented in health systems that don't function very well, essentially.
So
and now,
most easily, that you've sort of tackled the problems that were the easiest to tackle.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And now we're dealing with what's left, which is, we think, a fundamentally flawed health system. So what we're proposing is that the thing that needs to change in order to sort of budge those maternal and neonatal mortality rates is a redesign of the way that systems function. So in the US and in every high-income country, women deliver either in or very close to a health facility that can perform a C-section and provide a blood transfusion and do emergency services if needed. And I'm taking into account here, I think when people hear me talk about this, they think I'm advocating for a hospital birth. Just to put it in perspective, one of the projects that I'm still working on in the US is starting a freestanding birth center focused on racial justice, essentially. But it is not a hospital birth center. It is, however, within half an hour of those emergency services. It's a safe place for low-risk women to deliver. What's happening in Tanzania is that, and in many places, because it's been advocated by the WHO, is that women are delivering in primary...
World Health Organization, for those who don't know. Okay.
Sorry, World Health. Yeah. Women are delivering routinely in primary care centers, far from hospitals, far from emergency services. And the idea was to try to, which is a beautiful idea, it was this, that services need to be close to people's communities and that people need to have access. And that's all great, except those primary care facilities are not designed, they're not positioned to be able to deal with an emergency. And so you end up with women and babies in remote places without good systems, without good roads, dying essentially because they can't get the services that they need.
From something that actually is not that hard to handle. We're calling it an emergency because it happens in an emergency set.
It happens quickly.
It happens quickly, right? But it's not with the proper resources and tools. It's actually something that most trained physicians would know how to manage.
Yes.
If they had what they needed to manage it.
Yes.
Okay. So you're talking about redesigning a way the health system functions in rural communities in Tanzania currently. You're working in Tanzania, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm just curious too, for how, and I've known you and I'm actually not even sure of the answer to this, but this is pretty specific, right? Somehow you got to the heart of women and children being your main area of impact, right? Where you really want to specialize and hone in on how do we have systems that support that question, that fewer women and children are dying. Right? Why do you think it's that question? It could have been any number of things that led you in your medical and social justice and activist path, because all of it for you has always been wrapped up together, at least the way that I see it. You studied medicine fully to make a difference in communities. That was the reason. It wasn't because you loved blood, or were fascinated by whatever the heck. I don't even know. I could never do it. But you really went into it as your access point to service.
Yep, that's right.
I'm really clear about that. What do you think took you to this particular question? I mean, I have so many questions I want to answer in my life. That's why I'm how did you choose? What got you here?
I don't know why things happen. Things happen for whatever reasons they happen. But I do think that, so when I was 20, I got pregnant and decided to have an abortion and went through that process. I think that was actually the turning point, or it helped me focus in on this area of interest. That probably started it. Then along the way, other things helped me sort of focus, and in some cases, focus in places that didn't end up working for me. But I think in the end, it was a combination of sort of finding things that were interesting to my head, but then also things that sort of felt fulfilling to my heart.
And when you had kids of your own, was that?
Yeah. So like, again, it almost feels like I'm not supposed to have personal reasons for, like, it almost feels like as a technician, as a technical expert in this area, I'm supposed to say something technical. But like, I really do think that having a personal experience around pregnancy was really important to me early on in becoming interested in pregnancy. And then having kids reinforced that maybe. And then it's absolutely 100% true that like when I was going through early years of parenting, I was really interested in early parenting.
Right, of course.
Yeah. So I think a combination of sort of personal interest and then, it's been interesting, challenging to me.
Yeah.
Intellectually too.
And intellectually too, right? I also wonder if, there's a universality to women giving birth all over the world, right? Like if we can solve this problem, there is inherently the possibility, here's the optimist in me, but the possibility of like global impact for underrepresented and underserved communities, right? I wonder if that had a part.
Yeah, I think so. And also, like, I really do think that liberation comes from having all of us in society doing well. And like, this is such a gaping, horrendous problem. Like the disparity between, countries that have no maternal mortalities over years and a place like Tanzania, it's unacceptable, And so I think having that sort of thing hanging over us in the world somewhere keeps all of us, even those that are living wonderful, healthy lives, in some way it keeps us, I think, down.
Wow. That liberation comes from all of us in society doing well. That is so something you have really walked the talk of a lot, I think. And that's not just international. And I don't know if you can speak to this a little bit, but I read an article about how that's right here in the United States as well. There's a disparity in terms of around our racial lines of women's maternal health and well-being. Do you have anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, I've really learned a lot from working on this birth center project, which is firmly rooted in, these ideas of equity and racial justice. And
well, say a little bit more because people don't know. You know a lot, but I want you to expound on that a bit.
So when you look at outcomes for babies and women in the United States, Black women and their babies are, depending on where you're looking, more likely to have a poor outcome during that process. For a long time, people thought, well, yes, Black women are more likely to be poorly educated or be poor, or all these things. But even when you control for those factors, even when you look at the wealthiest Black women and the most educated Black women, their outcomes are still worse than the poorest, most disenfranchised white women in the United States. Finally, the research world, but also the service delivery world is coming to terms with the fact that the problem isn't race. It's not some biological thing about Black women that makes them more likely to have a problematic pregnancy and childbirth. The problem is racism. It's centuries of this piled on our society that has created a system that privileges white people, and in that process makes a sort of daily stress for people of color that we think is impacting health, and creating these poor outcomes. Part of what we're trying to do with this birth center is, yes, to be rooted in these disparities and to kind of face them head on and say, like, well, how do we create a service for people that is informed, engaged, is living this reality of these disparities? And also, how do we celebrate the amazing assets that people have and structure a special birth center that can make a difference in people's lives?
Where's the birth center?
Well, it hasn't started yet. It will be in Boston.
Got it. That's exciting. I didn't even know you were working on that as well as the work you're doing in Tanzania. So you've got a foot in various places.
Yeah, that all seems like a continuum of issues across different settings.
Right. Well,
that's global health too.
What's that?
I said the U.S. is part of the globe of
global health too. Right. Oh, exactly. Yeah. No, I love it. And that actually really leads me into something I want to talk to you about is you've always had your feet in various worlds, right? You mentioned really quickly when I asked about your work and to tell people about yourself and how you got here, that you're half Iranian and half Swiss. So I know from being your friend and knowing you all these years that you have a unique multicultural perspective of the world. And I'm wondering, how that has shaped and informed your work. You started to speak of it right now, but I thought you could speak to it a bit more. I have such a fond memory, Sanam, of being, we must have been like 19 maybe, and going to a celebration at your home in the suburbs. I'm embarrassed to admit, I don't remember. I don't think it was Ramadan. I always think it should have been Ramadan, but I don't know that it was Ramadan.
Were we jumping over the fire?
Yeah. Yeah. There were like all of these amazing Persian foods, amazing. And your mother was flitter-fluttering around as she does, like making sure that we were all happy and well fed. And then we like lit a fire in the suburban driveway. And in my memory of it, I'm like, I'm sure that this primarily white suburb was looking in on all of us, like jumping over this flame, like thinking, what the hell is going on? And I was like, it was beautiful. I loved the idea of jumping over to fire, like purging in the jumping of the fire.
Good memory, Sage.
I know, I don't always have a good memory, but that one really stuck with me. And just this sense of cultural pride that your mom continues to have until this day, that she instilled in you and your brothers and sister, and that she was not afraid to practice publicly in a world that doesn't often support that, like a white suburb in the United States of America. And then I also another super fun memory is driving your aunt and uncle's little white car around Switzerland, which didn't have power steering. And we totally didn't know how to drive it that well. And
we were really broke and had lots of groceries that stunk up the car. And,
we were eating stinky cheese. And I had been waiting tables before we went. We slept in a hayloft in a shepherd's cottage, which was somehow related to your uncle. I don't even know. It was an amazing adventure. And I was like, oh my gosh, both were fully your family. And there was an incredible sense of family connection and cultural connection to both of those parts of yourself. And that I just would love for you to share a bit about how that has informed who you are and the work you're currently doing in the world and living internationally with your kids.
While I was a young, a high school student or even a college student, I don't think I really realized how important or how it's like a category of experience that I didn't.
And it's not any less so.
No, right. And along with the hard parts and really truly feeling like an outsider without having a clear idea of why for most of my life in suburban America. The other thing that has absolutely given me is just this crazy drive, this ambition to make a difference. For me, I connect those two. So I think part of what my background has given me is that ambition. It's coming to a new country. My parents had nothing when they got to the US, and just taking it out and making it happen and getting the most out of this amazing country. And, so there's that. I think the sort of the bicultural background and sort of like you're highlighting, these are two cultures that are pretty different from each other. Iranians are known for being proud and gregarious and liking to dance. And, the Swiss are known for being meticulous and organized and sort of keeping to themselves.
Yeah.
I think they're pretty different in a lot of ways. And
I know your mother and father, and it's always been this beautiful, interesting puzzle, not anomaly. I'm like, wow, look at them. It's just I love it so much, but it is definitely, you can see the scientist and the artistic healer kind of.
Oh, right. And then you add to that, not only is, my dad's culture like that, but he's a biophysicist.
Right.
Not just, right. He's like that. And then my mom.
Then your mom's your mom.
A natural healer.
Right. Exactly. It's just such a collection of influences.
But I think what it's helped me learn how to do is recognize blind spots. Just to be open to the many different ways that people are put together and the many different experiences that they can have that form them. Yeah, so I feel like well versed in the ability to stay open to different kinds of people. And that has served me well in medicine and in public health. And, in moving to Tanzania and different culture and raising kids here, like that has really helped me be the way that I am.
Mm-hmm. I want to highlight that piece because, again, I think you so quietly understate something that I think is really, really hard for a lot of people. And, in my work now, more and more, I'm really getting positioned sort of as a communication expert and using communication to build community and build human connection. And it's starting to be interesting to watch more of that unfold with inside of like school organizations, which inherently inside of public school organizations, there's lots of different points of view, right? It is quite hard for most people to do what you do, which is to be well versed in the ability to stay open to different people. I love how you said to recognize blind spots. To connect that a little bit more, when you were practicing clinician and even now in the work you're doing, you worked in communities that were really diverse inside of Boston and other areas, right?
Yeah.
But I'm just thinking, like, as somebody with my own medical history, and unfortunately I've had quite a bit of medical history as a cancer patient and an infertility patient. And, I'm really clear that the medical profession does not always treat people with the degree of dignity that a human being warrants and deserves. And I think that your perspective going into a clinic where the population was often in poverty, was it an immigrant population?
I almost exclusively worked with immigrants
right.
in the US. I had to be with my people.
right, exactly. So there was a way in which you really were able to bring this diverse perspective from your background into the work you do. I think that it's important for all of us to consider, and we don't have to have your story, but whatever our story is, right? Like, what is it that we can bring to the work that we do that has a personal meaning for us, that adds value to how we see the world, I think that there's something to that.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people, I might even say a lot of women, underestimate the value of having those kinds of skills.
Yes.
Like those communication skills, those coalition building skills, those things I think are easily undervalued. And that's, I think, a product of our patriarchal society that hopefully we're sort of moving beyond. But, these skills that have to do with empathy and with connection and with communication and with understanding people and using intuition and those things, I think many of us need to do a better job of recognizing them and capitalizing on them.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I so appreciate you bringing that in about women and patriarchy. Here we go in racism, patriarchy. We're going to all the things.
We're hitting the big ones.
Disparity. Yeah. But that's what I wanted season 3 to be about. I wanted to be more deeply into that and uncovering what isn't talked about enough. I absolutely agree that what have been considered feminine traits, or this term that I just don't really care for because it makes it sound like it's less significant, soft skills, are these things around, you said several of them, empathy and communication, right? Compassion. I love this coalition building skills. I've never thought of myself as a coalition building. I'm like, heck yeah, that's what I do. Yes. Yeah. Coalition building skills that we for sure have not placed as much significance, when in fact, like nothing can be done without them. I mean, the premise of my work is literally that your happiness, your personal happiness and your professional success are directly related to the quality of your relationships. And that's not like touchy-feely or like, oh, let's all love each other. Like, not at all. In fact, that requires like walking into the flame of conflict. You're not being afraid to talk about hard things like disparities in women dying based on race in our country, in the United States, right? Like, it actually requires a ton of courage to have relationships that are open and honest and communicative and authentic in integrity. And yet it's not what's like the primary driver inside of professional development circles, corporate or public or private sector,
Yet it's the thing that you take away from your experience having been, a seriously ill patient as a young person.
Right.
Like, how were you treated by these physicians? And
I wasn't even thinking of that, but you're right. Like, just how you said I asked you that question of what led you with an interest in particularly in pregnancy and maternal child health. And there you go. And you tie it right back. Yeah. My experience having gone through the medical system in Philadelphia and then really having a personal passion and love for equity and justice work, like really seeing how we are not always treated. We're often not treated equally across providers and based on who the patient is, you know? And I will say, like, one of the number one things I learned from that health experience was how to advocate for myself. And I was already positioned as a white person with a degree of wealth to have more skills and the privilege in that area, right? To ask for what I want or what I need or whatever. But it still really takes something to say, actually, no, I don't want to do that. Or can we do it this way? Or, you know, that really hurt. You have to take blood from my hand. The only place you can take blood from my body is my hand. And no, you may not try and like practice on my arm. Like, I know I'm 41 now, like, you know, so that was a huge learning for me at 23. Like, okay, the only person who's really, 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 really going to look out for me and my well-being and know what's right for my body is me. Mm-hmm. And if I can give my clients any measure, any people I work with, like that sense of agency and empowering their voice, whether it be the medical profession, their professional careers, their marriage, their partnership, their parenting, whatever, their activism, like, okay, that's a big piece for me. So yeah, I hadn't made that connection before.
Yeah.
Of course, it's easier in others and not in yourself. On to a little bit of a lighter topic, because I know my listeners will be curious. How long ago was it now? A year and a half ago, you decided to take your kids and your husband and actually move to Tanzania, which again, and even when you were living in Boston, you lived in a neighborhood where most people who are doctors and have a doctoral degree from Harvard probably didn't choose to live. And I remember because we talked about it in terms of where you were going to send your son to school.
Yeah, that's right.
And there were some really big conversations for you around, you know, where do I feel like I belong and fit in? You know how you said I wanted to work with my people, other immigrants, and putting yourself in the communities that you want to serve. There's something here for me that I'm trying to get at around not being like a savior and really placing yourself in the community that you want to be a part of. So there's that piece that's, I guess, like still slightly heavy piece. And then the lighter piece, which is like, how did you choose to move to Tanzania? And can you tell people about how old your kids are and what that move has been like?
That's a lot of stuff, Sage.
I know, it's too many at once. Bad questioning on the part. Let's start with living in communities that you want to serve.
I think that just seems, it just seems natural to me. I feel uncomfortable with power differentials in general, especially as a doctor, and the whole thing makes me uncomfortable. So I feel like I just naturally like try to equalize that, which is kind of bullshit. Because in the end, I'm still a doctor, you know, with white skin who's marching around, you know, providing services. But I think
like some of that power you cannot shed, but for you,
it's not gonna,
right, of course.
But I think more importantly than that, and pretty simply, like, it's really valuable to me to live where I'm working because it gives me all of this information. It's almost like a little bit of an ethnographic project, right? Like by living in the neighborhood where my patients are living too, I think I can be a better provider because I know more about their lives and about, you know, where they shop and the
roads, the infrastructure, all the things you.
I think I can actually do a better job at what I'm doing by having that kind of information. And by also, like, that's the stuff that I'm good at. Like, I'm good at being observant and learning and thinking about people's lives and all that stuff. So I get to actually practice what I'm good at by living where I work when I'm taking care of people. It's really important to me to be able to gather that information. So that's that.
Got it. And so how old are your kiddos and what did they think when you said, hey, let's move to Tanzania? I know what your mother thought. She wanted to cry.
I know. I know. So they're 6 and 8 now. And we moved about, sorry about that noise. We moved a year and a half ago. And it was sort of a strange decision, I think. You know, most people that move to a low-income country from a high-income country do so because they've gotten a job, you know, so I moved before I had a job here. We moved before I had a job here. It was because this is where we wanted to live. We're interested in living here. And it made sense for professional reasons also. But like, it was the right thing for our family, given their ages, given where my husband was in his career, for us to move at that time. Speaking of courage, it did take some courage. Like, we moved here without like a host organization to give us paperwork, without it's just like the basic nuts and bolts of things. I think were harder that way. We've been sort of preparing them. I mean, my husband and I have been thinking about moving abroad since we met. We've been they knew that they weren't going to be in Boston forever.
Right. You planted the seeds.
Yeah, exactly. And thankfully, they're both really lovely, flexible, chill little people who love new things, which is such a blessing. There are kids like that, and there are kids that aren't like that, and they happen to be ones who really are excited by new things and new experiences.
Right. And
so that works
taking
out.
down the rabbit hole of nature versus nurture, because so are you.
Right. But I feel like I know people, like I do feel like we've been, I'm not talking on wood here, but that we've been blessed with the kids that fit with this kind of lifestyle. Like, they eat all sorts of different foods, and I don't know.
They're curious and they're flexible. Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, I will say too, it's full circle back to you and I becoming friends when we were next door to each other in the dorms freshman year at college at Penn, which is crazy when I think about that now. I mean, that's literally 23 years ago or so, 23 or 24 years ago. Gosh. Well, we just had our 20th anniversary. So yeah, 24 years.
24, right?
Mm-hmm.
Freshman year.
Then a couple years after that, we studied abroad, and you studied in Tanzania. And I feel like it captured your heart. It really captured your heart, and that it was sort of always waiting for you to take the turning, crisscrossing, zigging, zagging path of medical school and doctoral program and specialty in global health and maternal mortality, all the way back around to a place that captured your like youthful heart.
Yeah. That's been so cool to come back to this place as an adult. And I mean, it's still just a really special place to me. I think that describes it really well. It just sort of captured my heart. I like that Sage.
And I really loved seeing, and maybe just one more thing to speak to this really quickly, but it's a country that's about 50% Muslim, right?
Yeah. Which is interesting. I'm putting this together now. Yes, it is. Depending on where you are, those rates are, they change. Like in Zanzibar, nearly everyone is Muslim. But when I was a student here, it was an opportunity for me to learn about my religion and to practice more. And I definitely came back then having a more regular practice of prayer. Being in the US is tough. Like, you're not in a community of people who are doing, Islam is a religion of ritual and practice of daily life. Like, it's rooted in the things you do every day, like how you wash yourself and how you pray. I think it was really hard for me to do what I was doing and to have that happening at the same time. And coming back here over the past year and a half and being in a country that has, such a strong Muslim influence has been a really great chance for me to like strengthen my practice again. And I am so grateful for that, and to this country for that opportunity. It's a special country in that it has not had a history of conflict around religion, or it doesn't have the sort of same tribal tensions that Kenya has. It's been just a really sort of peaceful place.
I really loved when I saw, I think you sent me a photograph. I think it was the first Ramadan that you were there. And you said it's really been lovely. Again, back to this feeling of belonging, right? You said often in the States and white suburbia growing up, and there was a way in which you sort of felt like an outsider, even though you could look white. You look white, I guess, right? Whatever that means. But you could identify, you could pass, you could never have had that cultural pride if you wanted to hide it, right? This sense of belonging that we all yearn for. I loved that photo you sent. You're like, it's just like this lovely thing to be here where I'm not the only one, where others are being called to prayer. And I, as somebody who's not Muslim and who's been exploring, my Jewish history, my Jewish faith in my family and how it subverted it was for so long, and just being curious about that the older I get, I just really wanted to bring it into this conversation because I do feel like we are living in times where that's a courageous question, right? Like, what is Islam? What are the stereotypes that we're hearing in the United States that are newest wave of oppression in some ways, really here? And I don't know if new is even the accurate way, but like we've at least had some modicum of conversation around racism. It's sort of in my lifetime, it feels like this surgence. So I just so appreciate your willingness to share all the parts of who you are, all the parts, and say it's all of me in the work that I do and the questions that I ask and the way that I want to show up in the world. And you personally have taught me so much in that regard. And I know that you're going to say I'm your biggest fan and I'm biased. And we joke, for those listening, Sanam and I for decades have joked that we're like the president of each other's fan clubs.
That's right, girl.
I think the other one is the coolest one. But since this is my podcast and you're my guest, I get to win today. That I just, I think you're really remarkable. You speak 5 different languages. You've devoted your life to answering hard questions around issues of health disparity while raising a family and having a partnership. So I really appreciate you. For all who are listening, don't compare yourself, because that's another trap that we fall into, particularly as women, right? Like we're all doing work that is our work to do, and leaning into that more courageously is the question here. It's not that we have to go move to Africa and become doctors. And, I'm never going to do that. I'm going to do my contribution in my way. And I hope that you who are listening will do your contribution in your way. But Sanam, I'm so grateful that you have silenced the voice in your head that says, you're not good enough, or it's not time, or it's not perfect enough, because we can't wait. There are children dying.
I need to correct you. I haven't silenced it. I am silencing it.
Okay.
It's a constant process.
You're managing it. Right.
Yes.
It's not holding you back to the same degree that it wants.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
I fully take correction noted.
Work.
Correction noted. Absolutely. Yeah. So before we close, is there any advice you would like to offer for those who are listening who may be in a place of, gosh, there's something I really want to make a difference around, and I'm not sure how to begin or where to begin, or I'm afraid? Is there any advice you'd like to offer?
Maybe this isn't advice around that exactly, but maybe encouragement.
Yeah.
So I do think that everybody has a special set of, skills and gifts and interests and, ways of being in the world that is valuable. And, finding what that is and putting it towards the thing you care about and doing it in a way that is totally you brings, I think, a level of happiness that is so worth all of those struggles along the way. I just think there's peacefulness that comes with finding that sort of fit for yourself. So I guess encouragement to keep looking for those things that, God, I make it sound like somehow I figured it all out. Like, no, that is not what I'm saying. But I do think that the process of trying to find that has been really valuable to me. And
you want people to keep exploring.
Yes.
Yeah. Keep exploring. I think you're still exploring too, right? It's not that we ever arrive, but to trust that you have something to share, and that whatever your thing is, however it comes forward based on your experiences and your opportunities, to keep looking for what that might be. Because I love how you said that there's a degree of joy, happiness, and peace in I think of it as kind of like you're doing your right work, and by the way, that's not always the thing you get paid to do. Like if you're getting paid in another way, that's fine. But is there some other way that you want to show up and contribute through in your community or in your writing or your art or your expression? So I really think that that's important encouragement, because we disconnect from that a lot. Like as a mom raising kids, and I know you have the little kids as well, I look at their endless capacity for creativity and for curiosity. And I'm like, oh man, we disconnect from that as we age. So yes, I will second you in the encouragement to just keep exploring, to find the thing that is your right work for you. Thank you so much for being on the show and having this conversation with me. I will put some information in the show notes about our main points today so people can learn more about this kind of work and what this looks like. So I love and appreciate you madly. I still think you're top of the list for me. Maybe we'll continue this conversation another time with our listeners. Thank you, Sanam.
Paige, that was super fun. Thank you so much. I love you too. I really appreciate this work that you're doing. It's wonderful. Thank you, honey.
Thank you so much for listening to Naked Conversations. Yay! It really means the world to me every time you show up. And if you want to know more about how to work with me personally and my coaching, you can check that out over at sagebhabs.com. You can also get some great free resources over there about how to make powerful requests. and many blog posts full of resources for living a naked life, as well as grab a copy of my book, Naked Communication: Courageously Create the Relationships You Really Want. Thanks again. See you next time.